Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the anti-ideological mentality, as well as the crucial need for and power of ideology. So I'm going to start off with this clip of Jordan Peterson and Michael Knowles discussing how ideology is bad, just to prime you to understand that people are against ideology. You probably don't need any convincing of that, but this will just make it viscerally real to you before I start discussing this.
Let's begin with ideology. You have said that ideology is a parasite. That's a sentiment with which I thoroughly agree. You've explained the conflict between ideology and traditional strains of thought in the West. I think most people, even on the right, even conservatives, would find that statement startling. What is so bad about ideology?
Well, it provides a one-size-fits-all answer to every question. And there's a variety of problems with that. I mean, and it's a one-sided, biased, one-size-fits-all answer. And the bias depends on your particular ideological stance. In some ways, biases themselves aren't as bad as you might think because they're not that distinguishable from heuristics, which are simplifications that you need to operate in the world. I mean, we can't operate in the world as in considering it in all of its complexity. We have to simplify it. But there's dangers in the simplifications, and then there's dangers in a consistently biased simplification. And ideologies are consistently biased simplifications. Now, they're right sometimes. You see, part of the reason that the Western democratic systems work is because they allow people who have specified biases to compete in an open market of biases.
A
That's
liberal
essentially what an
exchange of
election
ideas.
is. Exactly. So, sometimes the right is right. Sometimes the extreme right is right. Sometimes the left is right, so to speak, and sometimes the extreme left is right. The extremes aren't correct, let's say, very often.
Well,
But
certainly not the
extreme
extreme left, yeah.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
But there are situations that arise where less generally applicable principles may sporadically hold. But anyways, the point is that in an open exchange of ideas, you get the opportunity for multiple people to put forward their biased heuristics, their biased oversimplifications, and to engage in the kind of debate that raises the resolution of the question and answer at hand. And that's necessary because the environment is shifting underneath you all the time. And so what was right yesterday, what was correct yesterday isn't necessarily correct today. And so you have to continually engage in negotiation and discussion to stay in the middle, let's say, in the correct place.
Okay, so much as I am tempted to dismantle everything he said there, I'm going to reframe this issue and start from my own starting point. It's okay to do that. You don't just have to start where other people started. People who have a bias for rationalism or a rationalistic attitude tend to do this. Because they're all about deduction, and so they're not really good at coming up with starting points, so they let other people set the terms of the conversation because they're all about deducing from premises. But in order to deduce from premises, you need premises. So when they talk with people, they let other people set it up, and then they just deduce logically on the premise that, well, logic will get me through this, but it won't necessarily, because if somebody comes up with some arbitrary premise, you're not necessarily going to be able to find a contradiction because it's all just words. It's not based on reality. In order for logic to get you through, you have to bring it to bear on reality. But if somebody else just starts with an arbitrary starting point, logic isn't going to get you anywhere. Anyway, I had this problem for a long time, so I know of that which I speak. So don't be afraid to reframe things. If somebody starts something the wrong way, say, no, that's not the right way to think about this. That's not the right starting point. I'm going to start here instead. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, the anti-ideological mentality. What people like Jordan Peterson and Michael Knowles and just about everyone else believe is, I mean, you heard all the cliches there. What's true yesterday isn't necessarily true tomorrow. We can't have this one-size-fits-all solution, right? We can't have these sweeping generalizations. Isn't it funny how everyone always says sweeping generalizations? You never hear anybody say, "Oh yeah, that was an accurate generalization," because they don't believe there is any such thing. Now they say sweeping at the beginning as a way of having their cake and eating it too. When you put an adjective before something, it implies there are other kinds of that thing. You say red book, that implies there are non-red books. So when they say sweeping generalization, what they're trying to do is imply, well, not all generalization is bad because you can't get away from it. They know that would just be absurd. But at the same time, they only ever talk about sweeping ones, which has the effect of sending the message that all generalizations are bad, which is what they actually believe. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. This is not a metaphor. This is an example of ideology. You measure a room, or you think about it, you figure out how to determine the area of a room, right? Width times length. And you figure that out because you say, oh, well, if I have this many discrete units of width in this line, how many lines am I going to have? Oh, I'm going to have as many lines as there is length. So length times width, that will give me the area. So you come up with a formula for determining the area. Now, what the anti-ideological mentality says is, you walk into the next room and you start trying to calculate the area, and Jordan Peterson comes along and he says, whoa, 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 what are you doing? You're just going to apply this ideology as if you know it applies in this new context? I mean, this floor is made out of wood. That was carpet. There are 3 windows in here. There were only 2 in that other room. It smells a little different in here. There's different furniture. How can you possibly just take this simplification and apply it over here to this other room when there's so much different about this room? Now, you understand what is absurd about that, but the epistemological reasons for that is that what is essential about the rooms is the same. In this case, it's extensionality. They both have extension along multiple dimensions, length, width. That's the same. It doesn't matter what material they're made out of or what furniture is in the room. That is not part of the essence of the thing. Now, they have to be made out of some material, and there has to be something or nothing. They have to have some relationship to other things in the room, if there is anything. So all of those things have to exist. Those are actual characteristics, and they have to exist in some way. But they are irrelevant from the perspective of calculating area. Now, this is a simple answer. I mean, calculating the area of a rectangle or a square is so simple it seems almost self-evident. But this can get more complicated. I mean, people would think this about calculating the volume of a cylinder. I mean, they don't think this because people think math is some magical thing or it's just some subjective game, so we can have different rules for it. But this is what people are actually doing. When somebody says, well, how can we know regulation won't work this time? How can we know that raising the minimum wage won't work here? Yeah, it didn't work there, but maybe it'll work in this industry. That is exactly the same as somebody walking into another room and saying, well, maybe the formula for determining area here won't work because this is a carpeted floor and not a wooded one. So, the value of ideology is that it allows you to generalize on the basis of essential similarities and differences. If you understand how to categorize things on the basis of similarities and differences, essential ones, then you can know that when you come to a new situation, oh, I already know something about this new situation. Because this situation is like this other situation I've already experienced. And there are superficial differences, but because it has this similarity, I know what that implies. Now, that is the basis of conceptualization and generalization and ideology. Ideology is it's just principled thinking in politics and culture usually. But what we're really talking about here is generalization and thinking in principles as such. So, this is the superpower Ayn Rand makes possible. Uniquely, Ayn Rand makes possible. Nobody else understands how to do this, but she does. And if you learn it from her, you will be, heat vision and ice breath and super strength and being able to fly, those things pale in comparison to understanding how to use your powers of abstraction. And most people don't understand how to use it. In fact, all of history, especially the history of philosophy, is just a record of man's struggle to understand the nature and function of his powers of abstraction. That's actually the subtitle of the history of philosophy I'm writing. That's how I frame it. So that book's going to be really good. I hope you're looking forward to it. But anyway, so the archetype of the blind prophet. Tiresias from ancient Greece. He's the blind prophet. He can tell the future, but he's blind. You see this throughout fiction, right? So in Dune, Paul goes blind, but he can see the future. So it's this, he can't see the physical entities around him, but he doesn't need to because he has this other form of vision. Luke, right? He wears the helmet and he deflects the blaster things. He can't see physical things around him, but he uses the Force to see. Turn off your targeting computer. Neo in the Matrix, right? In the later two movies. He goes blind, but he can see through his digital sight. Now, what this is Platonism, really. There's this world, and then there's another way of seeing things. A third eye. There's another perspective. There's this world of invisible things that most people don't see, and if you can learn how to see them, you have this ultimate power. Now that's true in a sense, but it's distorted. Whereas this is usually taken to be, you're getting a glimpse of immaterial entities in another world. What you are actually doing is seeing the relationships between things in this world, the only world that exists. And once you understand how to see relationships, abstract relationships, it really is like having a new form of vision you didn't have before. People, it's like if you could see all of these invisible things floating around you, right? And you're trying to avoid them, and people would look at you if they can't see these invisible things. They'd be like, what are you doing? You're acting so weird. But you're not, because you see what they don't see. And they don't realize the damage these invisible things are doing. Let's say they're radioactive or something, causing cancer. So it's exactly like that. So I don't pirate things off the internet. Now most people think, well, why don't you pirate things? You can get it for free, you're not going to get caught, why wouldn't you do that? That is somebody who does not have the superpower of abstraction and integrated thinking. He doesn't, it's really thinking in principles. That's the phrase you should remember. That kind of person does not see connections. He just sees things case by case. It's this thing, this thing, this thing. It's just a world of discriminated entities, and that's as far as he goes. He doesn't see the connections between them, and so he can't grasp why you wouldn't steal if you can get away with it. That is something that is only possible to somebody with the power of thinking in principles. Which is precisely what people who are against ideology are urging you not to grasp. So, ideology, thinking in principles, conceptualization, abstraction, integration, all of this is based on your fundamental ability to notice similarities and differences, and then to say, these things all fit together on the basis of these similarities. And since they all fall within this range, they all have this certain attribute within this range, then I can know for certain if I see something else that falls within this range, I can say, oh, that thing is going to be like this thing in a certain respect. That's exactly what you're doing when you walk into another room and you measure its area using the same formula. You say, oh, it doesn't matter that it's made out of different material because it has extensionality in 2 dimensions and it has a rectangular shape. Therefore, I know it's the same as this other thing, even though it's a different length, too. It's a different length, it's a different width, made out of different materials. It doesn't matter. You know that the essentials are the same, and so you can treat it the same way in a certain respect. That is the basis of generalization. Now, if you understand that, and you start developing your ability to do that and your confidence in doing it, as I said, you will be beyond Superman. Flying and super strength cannot compare to the power that gives you. You will start to feel alienated from other people because everyone else will seem blind to you because they are blind, in a sense. You will have that extra vision that Neo and Luke Skywalker and Paul Muad'Dib and Tiresias had, except not platonic. You'll have what they were actually trying to get at, but not understanding. So if you want that, then read Ayn Rand and listen to me because I'm good at explaining it and giving examples. And I understand it better than anyone else I know. And it is... you should have no higher priority once you grasp that this kind of power is possible. I mean, it's a practical thing. It's not just some idle toy or different perspective. It allows you to see better how to get what you want. You can leverage it in all kinds of practical ways. If you want to have better dates or do better at your job or whatever, that's what this is for. The single most valuable methodology you could adopt, technique you could gain, is precisely what everyone is screaming at you to reject as artificial and impractical. If you can get around that, if you can see what's wrong with that, and you start developing your powers of abstraction, which is not a form of simplified heuristic, biased simplified heuristic, as Jordan Peterson says, then you will become much smarter than Jordan Peterson, although I suspect anybody listening to this probably is already. Anyway, I don't want to go on too long. My practical advice is get Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology and read that 20 times until you understand it. This power makes you incredibly efficient. Imagine if you didn't have to think if you didn't have to reconstruct the formula for determining the volume of the cylinder every time. Not that you do that much necessarily, but, the regulation thing. There's a story. Ayn Rand was talking to somebody when Truman was trying to nationalize the steel mills, and this person was for it, and Ayn Rand was against it, and Ayn Rand explained what was wrong with it. And she convinced the person, and then the person said, okay, I see what you're saying, but what about coal mines? I got this story from Dr. Peikoff. But you see what's wrong there. Once you understand that you don't have to redo the work every time, you are exponentially increasing your mental power. You, instead of just, shooting at just one thing, you are just taking care of whole swaths of computation, of thinking with one act, whereas before, take hundreds, thousands of acts because you're doing it on a case-by-case basis. Once you understand that you can just apply that to everything within a range, the efficiency gain is incalculable. And you will seem like a super genius. And compared to other people, you will be. So, work on honing that power and understanding it. That's actually the whole point of philosophy, to teach you how to use your mind. So, if that seems valuable to you, then you should learn philosophy. And one of the ways you can do that is by listening to my podcast and watching videos like this. I just put out my last podcast on the American Civil War, and another one will come out Monday. I haven't decided what it's going to be yet, but I have 101 ideas, and I will never run out of things to talk about, so you can look forward to something on Monday. So I will talk to you then.